The film begins at an archaeological dig in 2010 near the Spanish village of Burgos. A team led by archaeologist Laia uncovers a mass grave from the Civil War, revealing the remains of 104 people. Meanwhile, in Barcelona, a girl named Ariadna receives word that the archaeologists may have found her great-grandfather. The search was initiated by her grandfather, Carlos, who hasn't seen his father since childhood. Ariadna visits him in a retirement home and takes his chair out to the terrace overlooking the sea. Lost in thought, she decides, against her mother's wishes, to visit the village and reconstruct the past herself. At the dig site, she meets Laura, who guides her to the excavation. On the way, the archaeologist tries to speak with Ariadna, but the girl stays quiet, mirroring her grandfather's reserved nature. At the site, Ariadna sees a large crowd, locals from nearby villages watching the work. An elderly man named Emilio approaches, claiming that a teacher named Antonio Baiz, possibly Ariadna's countryman, may be among the buried. The story moves to 1935. The young teacher Antonio has just arrived in the village. He inspects the classroom where he will work and then moves into a room allocated by the authorities from the mayor of Jamie. The newcomer learns that the previous teacher was a local priest. Later, while resting on the street, Antonio notices his predecessor celebrating Mass. Immediately, a curious local boy, Emilio, meets the new teacher and becomes his first student. Only 2 boys come to Antonio's first lesson, followed by a girl named Josefina, the mayor's daughter. She wants to drive Emilio out of his seat, but the teacher says that everyone in the class is free to choose any chair. Then the girl sits down in the teacher's seat, and the teacher has to accept it, since he allowed the choice. Emilio drops his pen on the ground, and the teacher notices that he is cringing, expecting a blow. His predecessor did not hesitate to physically communicate the need for discipline to his students. At the end of the lesson, Antonio invites his students to bring their friends to the next lesson because he has a surprise for them. Later, a local woman named Charo comes to his house to clean. In his free time, the teacher meets with Rodriguez, a political activist with communist views that Antonio also shares. They discuss a friend who became a political prisoner. The prisoner has a son, and Rodriguez asks the teacher to take the boy in so that he doesn't wander around homeless. In her vain attempts to find traces of her great-grandfather in the village archives, she discovers that the prison where he was kept burned down, and many of the registers have disappeared. So, she goes to see old Emilio, who had told her about the teacher earlier. It turns out that he studied with her grandfather, Carlos. In the old man's house, the girl sees a framed, handwritten child's work, as well as an old photo taken 75 years ago of children with their teacher Antonio, including Carlos, Ariadna's grandfather. When she learns that Carlos lived in her teacher's house, she asks to see the school building. The village has long since fallen into decay, and the building is empty. When asked why her grandfather did not tell her anything, Emilio admits that those who remained in the village from those days tried not to mention the teacher once again. In the past, Antonio has tried to find a common language with Carlos, but the boy shows a difficult character, threatens with a slingshot, and brazenly takes the master's bed. During class, the teacher introduces Carlos to the other students and then shows them the promised surprise, a miniature printing press on which the children can print their books. He shows them how the machine works. The sight of the paper, with the name of the village imprinted on it, delights the students. The lesson is interrupted by the appearance of Antonio's predecessor. The priest is unhappy that the new teacher pays little attention to Catholic education and does not go to church at all because of his atheism. Who knows what he can teach the children? Antonio insists that he is now the teacher here and is responsible for the curriculum, and then he escorts the priest out. In the evening, Antonio asks Charo to join him for dinner and tells him that he is a supporter of a fashionable system of education, when children are not dictated to a single program, but are allowed to reveal their creative potential. To do this, he teaches them how to write essays that turn into self-published books and how to think outside the box. Noticing that Emilio has stopped coming to class, the teacher learns from Josefina that his father won't let him come because there is too much work in the barn and there is no use in learning on the farm. When it's time to read, Carlos quarrels with Josephine and runs away from the classroom. After school, Antonio meets Emilio's father to convince him to let his son return to school, but he remains adamant that he doesn't need to study to herd cows. In the evening, Antonio asks Carlos why he ran away from class. It turns out that the boy can neither read nor write. His father did not have time to teach him. The teacher offers to help him learn to read and write, but the boy refuses the attempt to replace his father. In the future, Ariadna contacts her mother to find out if her grandfather told her anything. The mother says that her father was not very talkative. Later, she learns from Laura that there are many mass graves across the country that are being dug up to return the remains to relatives, but many of them are still waiting for their turn. Ariadna continues to study documents from the time, trying to find not only references to Carlos's great-grandfather, but also to learn the fate of her teacher Antonio. She learns that the locals decided to get rid of him by telling the army that he was a communist. During a field trip, the teacher tells the children that a small stream flows into a river, and the river flows into a bigger river, and the big river goes all the way to the sea. The students have never seen the sea, unlike him, who grew up on the coast. Antonio suggests that they write a story about the sea to create a new book. Soon, the children bring the teacher a collection of essays called The Sea. Realizing that the children imagine him as an ocean full of talks about the sea and sunsets, the teacher suggests that they go on a trip to his hometown in the summer to see the sea. To do this, he asks that the parents give written consent. He suggests that the children show the book of essays to their parents, hoping that this will help convince them. In the evening, the teacher reads Carlos a letter from his father in prison and says that it would be great if he could read the letter himself and write a reply. This will make his father happy, but they will have to work together. Reluctantly, Carlos agrees. Antonio's work continues. He takes the children on hikes, teaches them to dance, and in between he writes articles for a homemade newspaper on political topics, which causes resentment among the villagers. Not all locals like the teacher's communist views. The mayor, his wife, and the priest express their dissatisfaction with the teacher's idea of taking the children to the sea, and all the teacher's arguments fall on deaf ears. Charo's housewife advises him to be more cautious, to convince the mayor himself to give his consent first, and then the other parents will agree. During the celebration, when the locals are dancing in the square to live music, Antonio notices the mayor and seizes the moment. He hints to the mayor that his daughter, like all the other children, is very gifted, but he advises him to consider transferring her to another school. Soon after, during class, an education inspector enters the classroom, followed by a priest and the mayor. The inspector has received a complaint about the unsatisfactory level of education and has come for a surprise inspection. He questions the students about their reading, writing, and arithmetic skills. However, all of the children answered with excellent marks, including Carlos, who had only recently started learning to read and write. The inspector's attention is drawn to Antonio's homemade books. He explains that students exchange such works with other schools, including foreign ones, by mail, and thus broaden their horizons by learning firsthand about life outside their home village. Antonio explains that the children design the books themselves, including the drawings, and show them to the mayor and the priest. This approach makes a positive impression on the inspector. In the future, the aged Emilio shows Ariadna some of these books. The old man thought that he would never see them again, but after contacting the teacher's family, he received a few of the books as a souvenir. The girl asks if there are any other students of Antonio's left in the village, and then goes to see the elderly Josefina. However, when she learns about the purpose of the visit, the old woman drives her away, not wanting to discuss long-ago events. In the past, after the inspector's visit, young Josephine brings her teacher a written permission to go to the sea from her father. A joyful Antonio goes with him to Charo to show off. However, the woman is tormented by heavy thoughts. She advises the young idealist to leave the village because times are difficult, a war is brewing, and not everyone here likes his worldview. The teacher optimistically objects, hoping that everything will be fine. Soon Carlos writes a letter to his father on his own. After checking it, Antonio praises the student and says that his father will be proud of him and promises to send the letter personally. Moved, the boy hugs his teacher. One day, Antonio comes to his father Emilio, who is the only one who has not yet allowed his son to go to the sea. The teacher reads him an essay that his son wrote about him, in which he expresses his admiration for his father and his desire to be like him when he grows up. But even this fails to melt the animosity, and Antonio leaves with nothing. But the next day, Emilio comes to class and brings permission from his parents. Before the children can be happy for their classmate, a photographer comes to the door. The teacher tells the children to go home to clean up for the photo. While the photographer admires the achievements of technological progress, looking at them in the picture, Antonio pays him off. He then tells the children that he was happy to be their teacher, and they hug him as a group in return. In the future, Ariadna learns that archaeologists have found the remains, but it will take several more months to analyze the DNA, which the girl does not have because her sick grandfather cannot stand it. Disappointed that she hasn't found her great-grandfather, she returns to the village, where she is met by Josefina's daughter. After their meeting, she changed her mind and decided to hand over all the documents she had about the girl's father. Thanks to these papers, Ariadna learns that her great-grandfather was transferred to another prison, so he did not die here. This news upsets the girl, who is tired of fruitless searches and has lost hope of finding the truth. She leaves the village, but on the way, her mother calls her to tell her that her grandfather is getting worse and she should hurry up to say goodbye. On July 19, 1936, Charo learns from Carlos that the teacher did not spend the night at home. At this time, soldiers who have risen in rebellion against the country's legitimate government enter the village. The soldiers unload the beaten Antonio from the back of the truck and throw the books into the fire without even checking for communist propaganda. After that, the soldiers take the prisoner to take him to prison. There, he is met by political prisoners, including his friend Rodriguez and Carlos's father, who thanks the teacher for taking care of his son. Before they have time to pull on their friend's shirt, the guards come in and take the beaten Antonio away. He is taken at dawn somewhere in the mountains, where he is kneeled down and executed with a shot to the back of the head. After that, the executioners leave the body and drive away. Ariadna returns to the terrace of the nursing home, where her mother, daughter, and grandfather are waiting for her. She takes out an old photo of Antonio's class and a miraculously preserved copy of the book, The Sea, the children's version of The Sea, and reads it aloud. Among the works is a poem by Carlos that he wrote when he was a little boy. These words awaken memories in the mind of the old man, who loses touch with reality and cries with his granddaughter. The film ends with a brief historical note. Antonio's remains have never been found. In 2015, a school named after Burgos was founded in the village to honor his memory. Currently, the remains of 12,000 people have been found in mass graves across Spain left after the Civil War, and thousands more are still waiting to be found. This is the case when such teachers in the world can be counted on the fingers of one hand.